A prerequisite to be a sponsor on the Behind the Shield podcast is you have to bring a solution to one of our problems. And today's sponsor, Ease Alert, does exactly that. Founded by the son of a firefighter, Blake Richardson watched the impact of sleep deprivation on his father's health and decided to use modern technology to address that problem. As you've probably heard me mention many times, it is pure insanity that we wake an entire fire station for one crew to respond. And the way that we're alerted makes the firefighter's stress go from 0 to 100. Now, Ease Alert has a host of solutions, the first of which is the wearable TAC pod, which alerts the first responder of an incoming call through vibration in the wrist. So as you can imagine, in a communal bunk room, only the crews that need to respond will be woken up. Now, they also have the bunk alert system, which puts vibration into the bunk itself. There's LED lighting, a turnout timer, station automation where you can program bay doors to close or gas stoves to turn off. And understanding that sleep deprivation is behind so many things that ail us, a recent study showed that Ease Alert improves health impacts by 169%. So if you want to hear more about Ease Alert, you can listen to my conversation with Blake on episode 1168 of the Behind the Shield podcast, or go to easealert.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show British firefighter and MMA fighter Jason Kubiak. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the UK Fire and Rescue Service, some of his career calls, the Grenfell fire, his own powerful mental health story, prioritising family, the knife crime epidemic in the UK, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this podcast on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for other people to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Jason Kubiak. Enjoy. Well, Jason, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
No, it's an absolute pleasure and an honour. Thank you. I've been listening to you for a while. I stumbled across you a few months back, actually, and you've been a large part of my journey to and from work for the last few months. So, no, really excited and feel really honoured. Thank you very much.
Oh, I appreciate it. And thank you for listening. As you know, it's funny, when you Google firefighter podcast, in all the lists that come up, Behind the Shield is never in there. I don't know why. Yeah. Maybe because I don't just talk about firefighting, but it's so weird. 9 years, all the downloads, all the episodes, and So the only way people find this is, I guess, word of mouth, even to this day. So.
Yeah, I don't know how I stumbled across you, buddy. To be honest with you, I can't quite remember. I put some search into obviously the podcast, and it popped up, and then I've been pretty much hooked since then. To be honest with you.
Good, yeah. Well, there's so many people on there. I think almost at 1,200 now. So. Wow. The guests are just insane. They really are. All right. Well, very first question. Where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
You are finding me in a little village called Mixbury in Northamptonshire in the UK, England. So for you guys that might not know, pretty much 70 miles north of London, about a 10-minute drive from Silverstone Racetrack.
Brilliant. Well, let's start at the very beginning of your journey then. Tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
All right. I was born in 1978 and again in another little town called Bletchley. It's now turned into Milton Keynes. It's a bigger town. I've got a sister who's 4 years younger than me. My dad was half Polish. His family come over in the war and my mum and dad met. Unfortunately, we lost my dad pre-COVID. That's a story on all in itself, to be honest with you. But he was a plumber and a stonemason by trade. Couldn't read or write, but he managed to get through and get work done and stuff. So yeah, he was a unique man, let's put it that way. And my mum, was an insurance underwriter. You know, she was born in this country. It was a very different background. She was like a head girl at school, a private school, when they met, kind of like the rough of my dad and the poshness of my mum, kind of equals attracted, all that. And then that was that really. So we grew up. I've spent most of my life in Milton Keynes, in and around Milton Keynes and London. Grew up, and then obviously, that was my childhood was pretty good. To be fair, they did everything they could for us with what they had, and I still to this day I'd never change it. You know, some of the most important stories or some of the most important traits I learned from my dad was the type of man I should be as I grew up and the type of father I should be to my kids. So there's some things I'd never change for sure.
What area of stonemasonry was he focused on? Because it's in the book I just wrote last year, one of the characters flees World War II France, and he's a stonemason, and that's actually the skill that he brings to the UK.
Oh, no way. So he was... I don't know. I'm not expecting anyone to know who Milton Keynes is, but him and his brother did a large majority of laying the marble slabs, all the marble cladding on a lot of the buildings. They worked on a lot of posh kitchens and hotels and stuff like that, doing all work units and worktops, bits and pieces like that, really.
Brilliant. All right. And what about, did you say what your mum did as a profession? I can't remember.
She was an insurance underwriter, so
okay.
She's semi-retired. She lives with my sister now, and she's selling medical goods, I think, is what she does now, on a little telesales thing. So yeah, she's still killing it, bless her.
Brilliant. What about when you were in the school ages? What were you playing as far as sports exercise?
Wow. Started off rugby is where I really started when I was really young. Moved on to football, soccer. Kind of started to enjoy that team ethic and stuff. And then I got kind of pushed into boxing by my dad and hated every minute of it. Never liked a training session, never liked a sparring session. And then all of a sudden, I think I hit, my memory serves me right, around about 16, 17, just as you find girls and stuff. But that's when I kind of I found my love for boxing. And then I boxed amateur for many years, and I've kind of always had my hand in at that. And then I fell into jiu-jitsu many years ago. But yeah, predominantly football and boxing really was the thing for me when I was a youngster.
What was it that made you turn that corner between disliking boxing and all of a sudden leaning into it?
Do you know, that's a really good question. I think it was because it was something I was forced to do. And it was kind of that battle between me and my dad, and that kind of, that loggerheads, I don't want to do it, him throwing. And then when I eventually got to that point where I found it was more for myself and the enjoyment I got out of it, then that kind of turned, that love turned then. And then I found that, you learn so much out of contact sports, like you'll know, James, for sure. Like, just the stuff that you learn from doing it, being on time, having to set targets for yourself. You've got to be certain weights and stuff like that. There's lessons that taught me that I've taken through the whole of my life. So yeah, it's probably just when I got away from it being pushed onto me by my father.
I've always said, when I look back and I ask people the same thing, when I played team sports, and I played football, just super casually, but I played field hockey for college and all that, which I always feel I have to justify why I played college field hockey as a man, but it's quite a violent sport because you get to run around with a stick. But when you do an individual sport, you have the team element with the team sport, and that's great. But when there's an individual sport, you can't blame anyone else. Like you have to look in the mirror and go, I wasn't good enough to beat them. Or I let it be in the hands of the judges, and therefore I didn't beat them, enough. And so I found that incredibly humbling, and that self-talk became a lot stronger in a ring or on a mat than it was, for example, on a pitch.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. That and you go to some real dark places. Fortunately enough, when I did MMA, I didn't lose a bout, so I never experienced that feeling of loss. But I certainly went through it in the gym, that's for sure. But when it comes to boxing, I got stopped a few times boxing, and they hurt. They really hurt. And to come back from something, a loss in that environment, exactly like you said with the football, you got teammates and stuff. You've always got people that you can look at and blame at for a certain moment within a certain game. But when you stood there duking it out with someone, the only thing you really have to blame is yourself. If you don't turn up in shape, you don't turn up doing the right things, you've got nobody else to blame but yourself, right?
Absolutely. What about career aspirations? What were you dreaming of becoming when you were in school?
I always wanted to be a firefighter. That is what was always on my mind. Why, I don't know, because it's nothing in our family. We've got no military aspect in our family. No one joined any other emergency services, so it's just something I always wanted to do. And I can remember you alluding to on a podcast way back. You go to the careers officer, you sit down in front of the careers advisor, and they're like, "What do you want to do?" And I'm like, "I want to be a firefighter." And they're like, "You haven't got the grades for that. You got to think about doing something else." So academically, I wasn't great at school. So I had to send myself to college to sort of get my maths back up to speed and my English up to speed, because I struggled with the selection process. Physically, I was golden, but just that, the psychometric testing, English and maths wasn't great. So I got to a point where I was good enough just to pass the written test, and then that was it. That's history then. I had a few little bum end jobs that I bounced around doing before I got there, but I joined the fire service when I was just turning 19. So that's kind of all I've known.
Before we progress into adulthood, we talked before we hit record about some of the struggles, some of the, the wrong sides of the law, etc., that you found yourself on. It's become such an apparent conversation now that so many of us that put the uniform on have had things that were struggles when we were younger. And, if they're worked through and addressed, they can become strengths. It's not a bad thing at all. But if they're pushed down, buried down, left unaddressed, they can be, an addition to the things that we see in the sleep deprivation and all those elements. When you reflect back now with this kind of veteran lens that you have, were there any elements of your childhood you think that contributed to struggling later on?
Oh, I think so. I think there probably is. I think there is for most of us, right? I think there's moments in time when we see in a household that, look, it wasn't until my father passed away that I realised how difficult a life he had. And he wasn't loved as a child, if you like. So he didn't know anything other than what he experienced and how he would be with us. So there was times within our childhood where we got the tough end of the stick, if you like. It was tough in the household, and there was arguing and stuff, but nothing too different to anybody else. But it was difficult. Yeah, it was difficult from time to time. But that certainly has its part to play. Definitely, I think as I was a youngster. But as we alluded to before we hit the record button, I learned some valuable lessons from my dad and things that I would never change. And that was the type of man I should be, and how I should treat people, and the type of parent I should be when I become a parent. But he lived his life with his grandkids. That's where he excelled. So that's what I hold dear now.
The whole point of me writing the book, not constantly going back to my book, but was to also storytell generational trauma, which is why there's this World War II element. Because I think if you can look back and see not only your childhood, but your parents' childhoods and maybe even your grandparents' childhood, you see these dominoes that are falling. And we are simply a product of our friends and our family. That's it. That's how we're influenced. So if you can, as exactly like you said, you look back and go, well, they did the best with what they had at that moment. There wasn't this conversation about these other things, so there's no guilt, no shame, no blaming, but just an observation of the contributing factors to our own struggles. Then you can say, well, I'm not going to let that pass on to my kids. So I think it's such an important conversation that we're starting to have now about this generational trauma, because it's not creating a victim mentality. It's just observing the things that did set you up for failure, addressing them, and then not passing it on.
Yeah, for sure. I think as a young man, growing up in a household, you're just always looking for validation from your father. That's who you want to make happy. That's who you want to hear them words, don't you? Them words resonate. I'm proud of you, son. You know, that's all you ever want to hear. And God forbid, I've got 2 daughters, so the amount I repeat that day in, day out, you know, I tell them that every day. Probably a bit too much. I get nagged at by the wife for it, but you know, these are the things that you miss out on, and you relive them, don't you? And you try to instill that and push that on your children to make sure that they don't feel how you did it back in them times.
Absolutely. I'm the same. I hug my son. He's 18 now, and I still hug him, kiss him on the head, tell him I'm proud of him, tell him I love him. You know? So
yeah, it's mad. My eldest daughter's 24, and she's and my youngest is 14. So it's just a lot of them cuddles and kisses are gone now. You know, them days of hearing a dump out of the bed and that opening your eyes and your little shadow silhouette in the doorway, and just pulling the blankets to one side and letting them jump in. They're all gone now. So them cuddles, it's not cool to be with dad anymore.
Well, you mentioned about having to go to college, get the grades up before you got to test with FD. How competitive was it back then? And then walk me through what the process looked like.
Oh, wow. So back then, God, 90, when would that have been? 98, I think it was, something like that. So I was 18, 19. That was back then. You'd have to physically go to the fire station and get an application form. And I was applying then for a little county brigade, Buckinghamshire. So I think at the time when I finally got into the job, I think we had somewhere around about 560, maybe 600 whole-time firefighters spread across 5 or 6 whole-time stations. The rest were day crewed. But there was people queuing like for blocks, if you like, you know, all the way down the road, about 2,000 people applying for about 13 jobs. And James, I actually applied. I went through the process somewhere between 6 to 8 times. I applied, kept going back, kept seeing the same faces, would smash the bleep test, But yeah, just kept failing at that written test scenario. And it was the stories that we used to hear. If you didn't write in black ink, that would be straight away, because so many people applied that application would go in the bin. If it was a different colour ink, a spelling mistake, stuff like that. So you had to really concentrate on just getting the application correct to start with, to even get the call to go and do anything. But yeah, it took me several attempts, somewhere around about, between 6 to 8 times before I eventually got through the door. The physical aspect of it back then was just, can you run a bleep test? And I think it was around about 11.6 or something like that. And I could run for days back then. And that's all I ever did, football or boxing. It was out on the street, beating the street. So running was a piece of cake for me. So that wasn't a problem. And from what I can remember, it's such a long time ago, I can remember the physical aspect was you put a BA breathing apparatus set on, and they'd stick you in a little room, switch the lights off, make sure you weren't claustrophobic, send you up a ladder, take a leg lock, and then you'd have to look over your left shoulder, call out the letter that they had at the bottom of the ladder, look over your right shoulder, call out the letter, and then that was it. It was pretty much it, I think.
Just contrasting that, because it's such an interesting conversation. I don't know if you're having the same issues in the UK that we're having here in America, but you talked about, you know, thousands of applicants for 13 jobs. I had a similar thing when I was in California, whatever it is now, 19 years ago. What is the level of recruitment interest at the moment in the fire service in the UK?
So it's still quite good. The issue is, I think, financially. Obviously, I'm in London now. I've transferred into London, so that's a different fish altogether. You know, one of the biggest brigades in the world, hugely funded. They moan about the lack of funding that they're getting, but we've got, 5,000 whole-time firefighters. But there's still definitely it's still seen as a unique job, and the applicants are big. I think the issue, I say it's an issue, is how we look at our recruitment, the areas that we go, how we've tailored it. I think you've spoken about on many podcasts that we've listened to, that the standards has been lowered so far down that it's getting to a point where we're almost taking not the best that we could do, because there is a line. I do feel there is a line where we shouldn't drop below, and we're getting recruits turn up on stations, and I look at them, you know, I'm twice their age, or they're younger than my kids, or younger than my eldest, and it's like, you know, stomach hanging over his trousers. I'm like, how is that even possible? How is that even allowed? And it really does grip my shit, unfortunately, when I look around, especially with new recruits, even with some of the older guys that are coming to the end of their time. We've got a duty of care to look after ourselves and look after the people that are with us as well as our community,
Well, this is what's interesting is in America, the places that held those standards high still had a high level of recruitment when I was testing early in my career. And one of the good example is Anaheim, California. They would let 25% of their recruits go in the first probationary year on just through attrition. Like, there's the bar. You get, these opportunities to test. And if you don't make it throughout the year, you're already hired. If you don't make it, sorry, other places are still hiring, but you're not an Anaheim firefighter. And they had people lining up around the block, and it was the right kind of person. I think the Royal Marines did the recruitment when we were young. Like 99% need not apply. And then the right kind of person said, "Oh yeah, oh really? All right, then hold my beer. Watch." You know what I mean? And it worked. All the right people came flocking to the Royal Marines, fire, etc. But where I've seen people lower a bar, the last department I worked for, perfect example, the bar was in a trench. Better working conditions as far as like a little bit more time off, better pay, zero fire, which is a complete turn off to me. But I was doing it because I was a single dad getting forced to do multiple overtimes in my previous one. You would think that, if it was just an easier life that you'd have, people lining up around the door, but it wasn't the case. It was the opposite. Yeah. They were begging people to come work there. So I think it's such a myth that lowering the bar will help with recruitment. And I think it's the opposite. When you keep the bar high, like you said, you get a lot of people testing, but the right kind of person. And if someone is entering the profession with their belly already hanging over their belt, is that person 10 years from now going to be able to go 20 stories up in Grenfell and carry someone down? I mean, you don't have to be a genius to figure out the answer is no.
Yeah, I mean, I look after myself. I try my best to look after myself and take care of myself. Gym's a huge part of my mental health aspect and stuff. But I not to say that I'd struggle, but that's what keeps me going. Is that thought of being in that moment where you've got nothing else, the chips are down, you've got nothing else left. The only thing you can rely on is what you've learned subconsciously and the physical condition your body's in to get you out of trouble. That and a BA set are the only things that are really going to save your life when it all goes tits up, But you're exactly right. That bar's got to a point. Why should we not be picking from the pool up here? If the standard is that high. I mean, I applied, like I said, 7 or 8 times, and I think that actually favoured me going through that process. And the guys getting to know everyone, they're like, "Well, this is somebody we want." He might not be the smartest kid in the class, but he's done his bit to get where he is, and he obviously wants to do the job. So by keeping that standard at a certain level, if people fail, we're looking at people that want to come back, want to get to that position to be able to get into the job. It doesn't have to be bloody peak level of fitness, but to a level where it's decent, not where it is at the moment.
Well, it also just shows that you have done the preparation before you walk through the front door. When I was testing for my, I was going to the fire academy, I was working a day job. I was going to the fire academy because we have to school ourselves usually here and then go test for a job. So I was working Monday to Friday, and then 3 evenings a week I was going to school at night. And then it was one weekend day as well. On my lunch break, I was going to the YMCA and strength training. And then when I got home, like you, I was running usually 4 or 5 miles multiple times a week as well. Getting to the fire academy early, doing some combat challenge style training before we even started our class. So then when you show up at the front door, you're like, I don't care who else you're testing with. Like, I know that I'm at least ready for one of those positions. And that's the difference between, what we're talking about when you lower the bar and the kind of man and woman that you get is that on day one, you're ready to do now. Show me the job. Teach me your way of doing it. I've got my fitness down. I've got my skills down. I've got my, my academic preparation. Now I'm ready for you to show me how to be a real world firefighter.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so our process, once we got to training school, you got found out pretty quick at training school. I was really fortunate enough to do my training course in Evenley, the Fire Service College, so one of the largest colleges in the world. It's a fantastic facility. And we did 20 weeks was our training course. away from home on site. And I can remember waking up and people leaving in the middle of the night. They'd pack their rooms up and go, you know. And that was, we still had that disciplined service style of it. We'd get room checked in the morning. Our rooms would come and they'd check our rooms. You know, if you didn't have your rooms, they'd throw it all about. They'd have you out on the squad line in your full undress, and they'd be checking you. They'd have you out in the drill yard in your fire kit, checking your boots, you know, making sure everything was tip top. And then as the course progressed, people would drop out. They'd just naturally drop out. I just found out it wasn't for them. But I'll go on to a quick story before I forget it. There was a sub-officer called Sub-Officer Hookway, and he was like the drill sergeant, little mustache, he'd get right up in your face, screaming and shouting. And we had these 25-litre foam drums that were stuck on a drill yard. And if you fucked up, they go foam canisters into the barrier. So you'd have to pick up 2 foam carriers and you'd run all the way up to this barrier and then run all the way back, throw them back, get back in the squad line, 50 press-ups, whatever it would be. And as the course went on, myself and one of my pals who was on the course with me, Robbo Robertson, we emptied a few of these out and marked them with China graphs. So whenever we got a bollocking, we were the first to that pile of foam canisters to pick them up, and you'd be running along going, hey, as you run past the instructors. But yeah, sorry to digress, but it was tough. But do you know what? I'm so fond. The memories I have of how difficult it was and how much I enjoyed it, the studying aspect of it. You know, we got the opportunity to go home on a Friday, spend the weekend with our family, but we did all of our exams on the Monday. And that first couple of weeks, I failed like 2 exams. And like, you fail one more and you're gone. And I was like, wow. So then I just stayed for the whole of the reign in 18 weeks. I just didn't bother going home. Just spent the weekend there studying, you know.
It's funny you say that. Firstly, yeah, the shared suffering when the bar is set high forges a much tighter knit group, and I think that's something that's lost in the conversation. But my first department, Hialeah, we had the Kaiser sled, and it was on the roof of the burn building. So it was a 5-story tower, and then it was on the roof of that. So it was exposed to, you know, Miami weather, so extreme heat and these thunderstorms. So this damn thing was all rusty, and you'd hit it, and it would barely move. So we would sneak up, just like you guys, sand it down, put WD-40 on it, but then the instructor would see we'd hit it once and the freaking thing would slide all the way across to the other side.
It's brilliant. And the engineer, that's one of the things, you can't leave firefighters to their own devices. You leave them for long enough, they'll find out a way to get themselves in trouble or you in trouble. So you got to keep them occupied, definitely. But going back to the recruitment, you know, they finished the recruitment, but the courses itself now are like 11. They were 8 weeks long in London. They've extended that now for another 2 weeks on top of that. But, you know, you hear horror stories of the training courses and where they're at. You know, the hot wares and stuff that they do, they're not good enough as far as I'm concerned. That's my personal opinion. You know, we should be putting people into a position where you are at the point of dropping to your knees. You need to experience that before you come to a fire station. I remember we did something called a varied conditions drill, an exercise, and it was basically you get paired up with your BA partner, and it was this place they basically just hopped it out with cribs, and it was little tunnels where you had to turn around, do the Superman thing to get through, and it was over 3 floors. It was exhausting. Your whistle would go on your set, so you're coming down to 50 bar. They get you to break the seal, you walk you out, take the cylinder out your back, put a new one in, turn it on, and then throw you in and switch you around. And it was you didn't know where you was, what day of the week it was, but that was so challenging, and we're missing that now in our recruitment. We get guys coming to the station, the level of training that you're getting, fire-related hot wares, is not acceptable. We're going into jobs I'm going into jobs with recruits, and they're like, oh, it's a bit hot. I'm like, you're kidding me, right? There's not even any steam coming off this yet.
Again, going back to Hialeah, that's how it was there. They created basically an unwinnable scenario, but they didn't tell us it was unwinnable, and they said that our jobs depended on it to see how far we would push. And, you know, guys are throwing up in the mask, and exactly what you're talking about. They had like a collapse maze, and so you couldn't DC your mask. So the one guy's breathing through his puke the whole time. Whenever we're done, people getting like double lactated ringers, IVs in both arms. And it was exhausting, but the whole point was it was kind of like that Hell Week mentality. Like, how far can you push within reason, of course. They were very good. I'll say this, very, very good when it came to cooling, rehab, all that stuff. But it was the worst of places that you took yourself. And then, since then, as I progressed through my career and I found CrossFit, I also love the fact that you were redline a workout, once, twice a week. So the last time you were in a really fucking horrible place was Tuesday, not Fire Academy 10 years ago. You know what I mean? So I couldn't agree with you more. If when you lower that bar, you do a disservice. Now, someone's stuck on the 8th floor of a fire and they're freaking out, and now they pull the mask off their face and they die, versus having that mental fortitude and the physical resilience to be like, this is awful, but I know what awful's like. I've been here before. I can get myself out.
Yeah, I think a large part of what we've done in regards to martial arts and stuff, I think that sets a different callus on your brain for them times when it's tough, or them moments when it physically you've got a second, third, or fourth gear, or you've got that second wind in the tank. There's been times I've been in the doing Shark Tank before a bout, and I've been absolutely blasted. Fresh opponent, and you're 25 minutes into sparring and you've got nothing left, and then all of a sudden you hit that sweet spot again, and you go 3 or 4 rounds like you've just walked into the cage. And it's definitely right. We need to put people into pressure. We need to put it in that environment where it is controlled before it does become out of hand.
Absolutely. So where did you find yourself assigned first after academy?
So I come out of training school and I was assigned to Bletchley Fire Station, which was literally where I grew up, the area I grew up. So which was quite rare because they never used to like you to serve in that area where you lived, where you grew up. So I ended up on Blue Watch at Bletchley Fire Station. I was there for a couple of years, and then they moved us to what was a classed as like a super station back then. It was called Great Holme, which is in central Milton Keynes, so one of the central to the city. Multi-appliance station, had a turntable ladder, had a command unit, 2 frontline appliances. So watch strength of I think we had a watch strength of around about 17, something like that. So we got loads of good fun. That was pretty cool. Risks completely different. The city, high rises, some more high rises, etc. Overground trains, bits and pieces like that. But essentially started at Bletchley, went over to Great Holme, spent a number of years there. But such a fond memory. But both of them stations are gone now. They're gone. They've been knocked down. And they've built a super station. The government timings and everything, where the UK, we had to supply a fire engine within the first 5 minutes of a call, and then the second had to be within 7 minutes, because the government wanted to mess about with statistics and start cutting stations and stuff. They took that off the table, and then all of a sudden they've 2 of the main stations within Milton Keynes have shut and put one right in the middle. So we were never making times what we would have done previously with the 2 stations, the way that they were parted, So that was mildly frustrating. That was, it got really frustrating, to be honest with you. We had a few new group commanders, quite high-level ranking officers come in, weren't up for that watch mentality. So they started moving an officer and several firefighters off a watch and moving them around. So they wanted to break that stage, that watch culture, which was beyond me. And that was one of the reasons I ended up transferring over to London.
I've seen that in quite a few departments. I never understand it. We need to break that crew up, move them around, or we'll rotate crews through different stations. And seeing the value of a tight-knit crew that is really familiar with their area, with their first due, and they understand the idiosyncrasies. You mentioned the train, they know, we can't go down here for this call because if there's a train going, we're going to get stuck. So we're going to go around this way. That's going to take us over a bridge. We can't go that way. It's a one way, or, it dead ends into a park. Those are so important. And then the people, the actual humans, okay, it's probably this guy, he's homeless, he's got a history of violence. We've got to be careful. To break that up because of, you're threatened by the egos or the strength of the leadership in that department or whatever the thing is, it never made any sense to me. If that crew is working well and they're really good at what they do and they have a thorough knowledge of their first due, why would you rotate them just for the sake of rotating them?
Yeah, I put that down to that senior management and somebody having to do something to look for promotion. So they've got to be seen to implement something within the brigade that warrants a tick in a box for their recruit for them going for the next promotion round to the upper levels, the seniority, you know. But that was super frustrating. I mean, it got to a point when I was in Bucks as well. I think you guys out in the States, I'm not sure whether it's anything that you do. We have our retained section, so which would be our volunteers that get paid. But then what happened was we started getting, they started coming up with other different shifts for firefighters. So we'd have a bank shift, which would basically be anybody who was on call could apply for a bank shift off any other station, whether it be a retained station, a volunteer station, and come to a whole-time station. And then you'd have this resilience crew. So crews that would only work days, wouldn't do nights, wouldn't work weekends, but they'd be expected to go anywhere within the brigade. So there was one incident. I was driving. I turn around, I look in the back of the cab. I've got people that are all on more money than I am on different shift patterns, and it was like, nah, this isn't right. I can't live with this, you know. And we had a really snotty job. We had a road traffic collision, and you got guys that are just not experienced enough or haven't worked with before. And going back to that whole, maintaining that watch culture, knowing everybody's strengths and weaknesses. It was just, it was starting to get mind-boggling, and I started to get a bit resentful of the brigade and everything they were implementing at the time. Hence, again, the move.
Going back to being assigned to the station where you grew up, one of the things that I never had to experience because I always lived somewhere else, worked in a different place than I lived. But you hear the volunteers, especially here in America, and the retained firefighters in the UK. Did you have any incidences where you ended up running on someone that you knew?
Yeah. I lost somebody I went to school with. I turned up at a road traffic collision. A girl called Lucy Redmond. We were the first on scene. Was basically coming. So where in Milton Keynes, it's built on the grid system. It's similar to sort of the cities that you guys have got in the States. So it's like blocks built on that grid system. If you ever go wrong, you just turn right again, and you'll be back where you started, you know. So dual carriageways. So high speed, roads, 70 mile an hour we were looking at. But then we had, because you had these estates, these blocks, you had people wanting to travel across a fast moving lane of traffic, double lane, to get in to go the way that they wanted to go. And we campaigned for years to get them cut off because the amount of road traffic collisions we were attending was the majority of our calls at the time. And she just come out and got T-boned by a big old BMW doing about 70 mile an hour, flipped the car around, was first on scene. And I remember it didn't dawn on me to start with because the engine of the car was out. I was on the bonnet just holding, just maintaining her airway and stuff. And it was like somebody switched a tap on, boom, just the blood just started coming out of her nose really quickly. She started ripping around, and that was it. She'd gone, and that was, But it didn't hit me straight away that's who it was until we started tidying up the scene. The police were doing their thing, and then you go into the whole body retrieval thing. You're like, wow, I used to go to school here,
What impact did that have? Because like I said, when I drive around Orlando, like when I go to the airport, for example, I always go past a place where I had a taxi versus two pedestrians. My first call as a paramedic, standalone paramedic.
Jesus.
But, so I visit the cities, and when I do drive there, I see these things, but I don't live there. What impact did that have? Because, I mean, this is something that our volunteers really, experience a lot, and no one talks about it that much as far as on the career side. What impact did that have on you as far as knowing a patient versus maybe later, especially in London, where the chances of that were slim to none?
It affects me still now. A lot of my family now have moved out from Milton Keynes, but there's not a road where we didn't have a road traffic collision. And unfortunately, what they get, you go around Milton Keynes, you'll see memorial after memorial near the area where that road traffic collision was. So there's a constant reminder when you drive in. There's certain roads that I won't even drive down because it was so bad, and it triggers memories and thought processes and stuff. But there's parts, like you said, there's areas that I won't drive. There's roads that I won't drive down because of it triggers some memories and stuff of some pretty gnarly road traffic collisions. One in particular that I still struggle with. We had on the A421, 2 lorries, car stuck in the middle, boom, just squished in between. We get there, it's like just nice and slow. There's nothing we can do. The car's absolutely obliterated. It's down the back of an Arctic. It's been pushed all the way down the back of an Arctic. So we were there for about 4 hours, cutting, moving, cutting, moving, cutting, moving, body. And then I think there's 5 people removed from the car. It was just corsetined like the length of a dining room table. And there was a 6-month-old baby on the mum's lap, and that was the only survivor of that incident. She was curled up in the mum's lap, and that was the only person that survived was that little baby stuck in that car. And that was a huge one for us, which I still struggle with to this day. So that road gets bypassed, unfortunately, now.
Understandably so. This is what drives me crazy in America, and I don't know. I'm assuming the British driving standards are the same, but when you contrast the two, having been a 17-year-old kid that took the driving test in England, and then as a 27-year-old took the driving test here in America, our test standards are so low. And I've been here, over 20 years now, and not once have I ever heard a conversation about, well, what are we going to do to make to improve the way that we train our drivers, because they put roundabouts everywhere here. No one's even had any education on how to use a roundabout. I mean, it's insane. So we have, but you're talking about the memorials. All our roads have just memorials everywhere, little round circles with flowers next to them. And it's over and over and over and again. And I hold the UK up as probably some of the highest standards of driving. A lot of our, when we were young, everyone was taking them 2, 3, 4 times before they passed. And, and our roads are dangerous, obviously, very narrow, single lane each way, usually the lanes in the countryside. I wish that the US would have the humility to say, look, I think we have something crazy like 6 million accidents a year. We lose 40,000 people. 40,000 people die every year. And that's probably hundreds of thousands with life-changing injuries that survived, and zero conversation about the driving standards.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think here, with regards, I can give my personal experience with an older daughter. She's at 24, watching her go through her driving lessons, etc. And the things that the insurance companies implement now, with the insurances are so high that the expectation is to have these little black boxes in their car, so they're only allowed to go out at certain times of the night. It flags up if they break the speed limit, so that can increase their insurances. So again, that's another method to keeping them. If they don't have that within their vehicle, then their insurance premium is through the roof. More often than not, the insurance is going to cost more than what the car is for their first vehicle. So they've got to have this black box. There's that period of time from, say, 10 o'clock in the evening, and they're not allowed to drive. They have to go from 6 in the morning. It monitors their speed, and then they'll get letters through and all sorts. So I've driven in the States a few times, and it's a bit wild. It's a bit too wild for me.
It is crazy. Well, I know we're going to talk about kind of your mental health journey. Just before we do, if it lines up, what about some other career calls? And they don't have to be the nastiest, gory ones by any means, but significant calls throughout your career.
Oh, yeah. James, I think I probably speak for a lot of people that do this job, whether they be, ambulance service, EMS, that kind of thing, firefighters. I can remember the first fatal incident I went to, and I can remember the last one that I went to a couple of months back, and everything in between. They don't go away. They don't. You can protect yourself as much as you can, but some which are some really significant ones which really stand out for me. When I moved to London, one of the first incidents we had, well, not one of the first incidents, but one of the bad fatals we had a flat fire. So it was a house that had been turned into two flats, essentially. Entrance on the side for the upper flat, for the first floor, and then a ground floor flat. So we turned up, there's smoke coming around the back of the house. And then there's guys with suitcases coming out of the ground floor flat. And I'm like, is anybody in there? Anybody in there? And they're like, yeah, they could hear somebody banging about. So then, right, that gets flagged up, person's reported. We've got every man and their dog turning up then. So we're going under there, and by the front door, tried to get the front door open. It's only open by a couple of inches. Ramming, can't get in. Managed to drop my shoulder in it. blasted open a door, and the place was just hoarded like you could never imagine. You were fighting to get up the stairs with the amount of paper and stuff that was on there. You were sliding back down again, and I could see the glow and the fire licking around the top on the landing. So we've gone up with our BA partner, gone straight in. So as far as we're aware, it's still personal reported. So I've made a tackle on the fire, started to get that under control, which was in a bedroom, fully involved. It was punching out the window out the back bedroom, and I sent the other guy to go and search because it's personally reported. So they're off searching. As soon as I dealt with the fire, I'm in the kitchen having a search, and I was probably it felt like about a metre off the floor with the amount of rubbish and everything that was in there. As we're walking around, I've then radioed and said, look, we're going to need another crew in here. The place is so heavily hoarded. We're not going to be able to do a forest search unless we get another crew to back us up. As I ventilated the living room, I've come back round, found the bathroom, and a guy sat on a plasterer's bucket full of shit, sat on it, naked. There's a toilet overflowing with human shit. There's a bath full of piss and shit, and he's died on the toilet. So I've radioed down quite clearly. He's been dead for a while, way before the fire, because as you touch him, the whole of his body's moving. He's rigid, so he'd been dead for quite some time. And the fire had obviously started from whatever happened in the bedroom. But I'll never forget that one. One, because of the scenario and how bad it was. A registered flat to the Salvation Army, and this guy was homeless, and he must have just missed the loop. So that was awful. But on top of that, I can remember our cultural review had just come out in the brigade, so we were getting hammered in the press. And I can remember an officer saying to me, "Why didn't you bring him out?" And I was like, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "Why didn't you bring him out? How did you know he was dead?" I said, "Look, between us, the guys that were up there, the amount of time I'd served and my experiences, I took my gloves off, I had his head, I was looking, I was fit. I was like, boss, he's gone." He said, "Well, you're going to get asked a question on the back of the cultural review. Did you leave him in there because of his authenticity?" I said, "Don't ask me that question again." I said, "If you ask me that question again, I'll walk off this fire ground." I said, you won't see me again." I said, "You have no idea the type of person I am or anything about me. How dare you ask him questions?" He goes, "Well, it's going to get asked." And then he goes, "We don't play God. You don't decide whether you leave a body behind." And that really messed me up for a number of months. That thought process going through my head, why did you leave him? We don't play God. I'm like, he was clearly. But then that makes you double check constantly then about what happened. Off the back of that, there's been a change to policy that we leave no bodies and no bodies in situ anymore, unless they're going to become overcome by fire. So yeah, that was quite messy, but and unfortunately, the dark humour and how you get through it. One of the guys actually did all the calculations to see how long it would have taken him to fill up the bath. Back to the station.
Some high-level algebra right there.
Oh my God, yeah. I was like, how did you do it? So you take a measurement, and I go back to training school when we was trying to figure out what water we had in a bloody lake to supply. But yeah, so that was pretty horrific. But it was just seeing kind of the hard thing with that was just seeing how people get missed. Mental health is such a huge thing, and in London there's so many people which aren't getting the support or are flying under that mental health radar, aren't registered, and especially somebody in that position that's so vulnerable, living in them conditions. People weren't coming to check on him. People weren't coming to see him, and hoarding itself is a mental health tied in with mental health issues. And why was this guy not supported? So that was really difficult. The conversations coming off the back of that. But we've had some. I've had some fantastic incidents where we've had some really, really good outcomes. I got accommodation in my last brigade in Bucks. We very different to London, very different because it's smaller. I think the firefighters and the level of what we do in the smaller brigades, I think we turn out better firefighters. Unfortunately, one of London's strengths is also one of their weaknesses, and that's the amount of firefighters that we have. So to get to a level on that cascade of training, things take so long to do and implement. So we were really, really good at a lot of things in Bucks. We were water rescue trained, we were line rescue trained, we had chemical suits, everything we'd have on our station. We had all the uprated RTC equipment and everything like that. Whereas in London, you got rescue units specifically for them jobs. So this one particular incident, we were sitting down just having a cup of coffee in the morning, bells go down, car in canal. So I was driving this day. So we got the guys, so we used to take depending on the job, we'd take the chemical suits off the back and they'd put the dry suits on and they'd be rigging en route. And now you know what dry suits like, it's an absolute nightmare. You're in the back of the truck, I'm driving, they're trying to get fitted up. Turn up on scene and there's a car in the middle of the canal, just bobbing around. So this old guy, his morning routine, he'd go to the coffee shop just at the bottom of the canal, we'd drive up and he'd park up at the canal and he'd put his handbrake on and he'd drink his coffee watching the canal barges go past, just drinking his coffee. And he's a disabled gentleman. Somehow he's kicked the car into gear and he's just gone, whoop, dropped off the edge and started bobbing around in the water. So we get there, we're like, right, are you all right, sir? Everything cool? Yeah, I'm all right. Just hold on a minute. Guys are still getting ready, trying to get their head through the bloody dry suit, trying to zip it up. And there's two members of public on the opposite side of the canal. So we're sat there waiting. And in them moments, it feels like it's taking forever, doesn't it, for something to happen. And then all of a sudden, the car starts dipping down like it does in the movies. And the roof starts dipping under the water. So it's starting to go and I'm like flipping out. And my governors, so I don't know whether you do a similar sort of thing in London, in the States, we have to declare ops discretion. So when we're going outside of policy to save savable life or to make, have a dramatic effect on whatever's occurring. So my governor at the time was a guy called John Carson. He was my mentor when I joined the fire brigade. Fantastic human, retired now, still talking. He's like, "You good, Jace?" I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "You're going in?" I went, Yeah, I am. So jumped in the canal, swam across, got to the car, just as it's dipping under the water and that pressure change, boom, managed to pull him out and then swim to the side. And that was probably quite a thrilling sort of incident for us. And that was, I've got the accommodation up on the back wall there for that.
And what ethnicity was he, and did that come into play?
Yeah, he was an old boy.
Out the white bloke.
Yeah, I know, it's terrible, right? But that was fantastic. So that was really, really cool, really cool. You feel like the shit you get back. It's that whole tea of medals when you get back to station, a cup of tea, pats on the back. The assistant chief, the ACO, Jason Thirlwell at the time, comes down, shakes everyone's hand. Well done, James. You've done a cracking job under really difficult conditions, using ops discretion. And then you're just like that, aren't you? You're taking it all in. But yeah, that was pretty epic. But going back to John Carson, who was in charge, he was a subbo at the time. He was my mentor when I first joined the brigade, and I had my first ever BA wear with him. And I'll never forget it because it was the coolest fucking thing in the world. It was a YMCA. I remember second floor, flat fire, right? None of these nozzles, controllable nozzles. You can cone up, cone down, flow rates. It was what we called an old AWG branch, just a straight jet out of it. Blast you off your feet if you hit it. On the landing, and I can remember going by the front door and he's like, "You ready?" I'm like, yeah, I'm ready. So the door goes in, we go in, and he gives me the branch straight away. He's gone, "Don't do anything, don't blast it down the road, just wait, slow down." And we've walked in, and it's his kitchen's going, it's rolling over like that. And we're sat on this sofa in this lounge in this YMCA, and he's going, watch it, look how interesting it is, listen to it. Look what it's doing. He said, "Now give it a bit of water." And I will never forget that. That was the best BA wear I've ever had in my life. I'm sitting there, shitting myself. And he's going, "Don't put any water on it, don't put any water on it." I'm like, whoa. Yeah, it was mega. So yeah, but lots of stories, more often than not, unfortunately, they're not the greatest outcomes in this job. I think that's one of the hardest things that we deal with. But we're there to rescue someone, and we pass them on to the ambulance service, and sometimes we don't get to hear the end result of what happened. I mean, whether that would help close your why sometimes, quite possibly. But yeah, oh God, we've had some incidents over the years, James. One last one, we turned up to a house fire. A lady had put round a mental health issue. She put a duck duvet down. round her neck, carried herself in paraffin petrol and set herself on fire. And we turned up, gone in through the door. She's in the hallway, rapid, really hot burn. It burnt all her clothes off of her body, the poor thing. Everyone's banging around, and I'm just like, rest, stop. I mean, she had 100% full thickness burns to her arms. I can remember it vividly. And I'm like, look, I think she's probably gone. I don't think it was like a movie scene. It was all in slow motion. And I'm like, look, just stop. I don't think we're going to need to move her. So I've knelt down, put my knee, and my torch has gone down and shined. Her eyes have gone, and she got started to gasp. I was like, oh, shit, I've got to do something now. And what do? So I'm trying to grab her arms. I can't grab her arms. I'd have degloved her. I would have pulled her arms off. So I'm trying to squeeze under her head, and she's stuck to the carpet. So I pull round, come round to the front. I'm getting one of the guys trying to get her back up off the carpet. And I've like double arm wrapped her legs, and I'm pulling. And I felt a pop. A hammy goes, as I pop, pull her off the carpet, get her outside. The guys get straight to work with her, get straight on her, breathing. And the maddest thing with this was HEMS, so our emergency helicopter, our trauma doctors turn up in a helicopter or a car, so they've turned up on scene. They take over, listening to them, doing, watching what they do. It's what you guys do is incredible. I'm still in awe sometimes when I see you doing stuff on the side of the road. It blows my mind. And HEMS doctor pulls us all round at the end. Once she's off gone. He's like, guys, she's got full thickness burns to her arms, most of her body. You know, if she doesn't die tonight, she will be gone in a few days from massive infection from the burn areas on her body. About 3 months later, we get a phone call from her carer asking if we took her mobile phone out of the house, so she was still alive. They amputated both of her arms and one of her legs. And we were like, what the fuck? And that is beyond me. Still to this day, I've seen people, and then to see someone that severely burnt and yet still survive, it's just mind-boggling, mind-boggling. But yeah, that was a crazy one.
I had a guy, my 2 departments ago, and it was a house fire. We were on the rescue, which is like the fire/EMS unit. And as we're heading towards the fire, bunkered up, ready to, do the actual fire operations side, the medic that was in that first queue, their area, is crying out for a second ambulance, the rescue. They had a guy come out of the house fully on fire. He's leaning up against the fence. I think the neighbors had a hose, so they hosed him down. So we get there. We got this guy, again, full thickness burns, head to toe. The only thing that wasn't burnt on him were the soles of his feet. And so we end up, I jump over the fence. We do, the backboard standing takedown, get him over the other side. And I wrote about this in my first book. I'm literally at the head getting ready to intubate him, and almost like reflexively, because we do so many EMS calls. My partner, who was the original medic, I jumped into his rig. He'd ask the guy, "Sir, what's your name?" Now, this guy, without being too graphic, no nose, no eyes, fingers, everything is just burnt off. And he answers as clearly as you and I are speaking today. And I'm literally about to intubate him, and I'm like, well, shit, I guess I'm not intubating him now. So we end up putting an O2 mask on him, just what we call a non-rebreather, because he's talking to us. I mean, he's conscious. It's insane. So I work on the burns, which is for us just literally basically putting a dry burn sheet on. The fire is literally 5 minutes from the hospital. So before we know it, we're already there. We wheel this guy in with a mask on his face, completely, burnt to a crisp. So the ER are looking at us like, what in the fuck are you doing? And we're like, wait, just, listen. And we asked him a question, and he talks. And an hour later, he was dead. But what was just insane is I'm not a big religious person or anything. I'm not a big ghost hunter person, but I have never seen a clearer example of a spirit not knowing that the body was dead, because anatomically his tongue was gone. I mean, there is no way that his airway or his vocal cords should have been intact, but he was speaking as clearly as you and I are now. So it's another comparative burn story. Insane. But I mean, I'm so glad that your woman, was able to recover, and hopefully the duvet saved her, from some of that.
It's insane, isn't it? But that was what you went to there, where you were speaking to him. I can remember kneeling there, my BA sets off, and I'm trying to help. The paramedics are in, and they're asking her to move her leg, and she's moving her leg, and she's listening, she's responding. I'm like, what? This is insane. Absolutely, the human body, hey, it's an incredible piece of equipment.
Absolutely. I want to circle around to something you said before, because one of the things that we don't talk about a lot, obviously the stories you've just told, people like, oh, well, that would be challenging to your mental health. But there are so many other elements. Sleep deprivation, I harp on all the time. But, the organizational stress and or betrayal piece is a big part of this conversation, and really what a lot of people struggle with. Talk to me about what a cultural review is. And then what impact did that conversation about leaving that gentleman in the house have on you personally?
Well, the cultural review come off the back of the government implementing it once we have the Her Majesty's come out at the time. They come out and they inspect the fire brigade, and they see that we had lots of failings. So off the back of that, the fire brigade then did their independent review, which they got somebody to come in, and his findings was there was a systemic racial abuse, misogyny, all sorts of stuff. But all the stories and everything that he'd investigated was from many, many years ago, and a lot of it was from senior management in that office environment. The firefighters, pretty much, it was. Look, I'm 100% certain that people have been through things, racism 100% within the fire service. I've seen it myself when I've been on duty, when I first started. Misogynistic people, I've seen it, but that being released then to the public, we took a bit of a battering for a number of months. For that what that did for us and our relationship with the community and the people within the community. We were at points shutting down the fire stations, because usually we have an open door policy. We're on shift. The doors, the base of the doors are open. If anybody wants to come in, they can visit with their children, their family. We'll take them around the station, do all that kind of stuff. It got to a point where we was having to lock the fire stations down. We was getting some pretty significant abuse from the community members, and rightly so, from the stories that were on there, But going back to that moment when I was asked that question, that hit hard. That really did hit hard at that moment of time, because it's irrelevant. Essentially, what we're going to do is rescue somebody. Anything else is irrelevant. Our sole goal and sole purpose is to be in that environment, to be there to try and save somebody's life, and to be told you've made potentially a conscious decision to leave somebody because of their ethnicity, or that you've played God. It was really difficult to deal with for a number of months. I mean, and it still grates me now. I wish I had the opportunity to speak to that officer, but London being so vast, so they just dissipate into the numbers that are there, But yeah, hugely impactful. The whole cultural review, everything had a huge impact. We're coming out the other side now. We've done the right things as a brigade, that implemented the right things to improve. The investigations have taken place. Everything seems to be on the right path now. We've got our relationships back with the community, that's for sure. It kind of, what's the day's news is soon tomorrow, yesterday's. It goes pretty quick. But it was a pretty rough time for the brigade, definitely.
I don't think there's a profession that demonstrates how race, gender, sexual orientation matters less than the fire service. And the reason I say that, when we're in a structure fire and we're in our bunker gear, you can't tell who the black one is, or the straight one, or the gay one, or the woman, but you can tell who the shit one is and who the good one is, who the fit one is and who the fat one is. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I've always said the only prejudice in the fire service is those who can and those who can't. And that needs to be there. That's a legitimate prejudice. But the thought that you're going to make entry to a fire, fight your way to the front door, break your way open through the front door, fight your way through all kinds of human shit to get to someone, then be like, oh, turn around, it's a black bloke. We're leaving now, is insane. The same way as an American cop pulls over a car that's got all tinted windows, which is everyone here. And then, it's because you couldn't even see through the window. What are you talking about? You got no idea who that person was. And that kind of messaging, I think, is so irresponsible, because are there racists? Are there misogynists? Are there all the things? Yes, as there are carpenters and plumbers and shopkeepers and bankers and accountants.
Yeah.
But is it rampant through police, fire? I mean, from all the places that I've ever been exposed to, the answer is no.
100%, yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you. It's just the question that he felt he had to ask. And I said, what even gives you where in your right mind do you think that's even an acceptable question to ask at this moment in time? I was literally covered in human shit from the searching, because it had been defecated around the whole of the house. So we've been decontaminated. It's at like 3:00 in the morning, James. I'm stood there in my uniform, putting my fire boots, because our decontamination policies and stuff are probably, I think, slightly different to your guys. So our kit and everything goes straight away. Our bunker kit, if you like, our fire kit's gone. So we stood there getting debriefed. I'm soaking wet through from head to toe from the sweat from working so hard, and then to be asked that question, it's like, wow. Wow.
Speaking of mixed messages, I have heard a chief in 2 departments ago say to an orientation class, and we were talking about, I forget even why it came up, but he was saying in the UK, the firefighters don't go interior. And basically the whole thing was how heroic we are as American firefighters, because we go in, and in Europe, they don't go in. I'm going to give you the microphone if you want to correct that statement at all.
Well, it's the risk versus benefit, right? We get that. Look, there are risk. We have become risk averse. We have gone from when I joined, James, to this moment in time. The brigade has changed dramatically, drastically in equipment, firefighting techniques, the equipment that we've got. Everything's changed. Has had an impact. When I first joined, we'd be going into a derelict structure fire. We'd go in, we'd go through the front door, we'd be straight in there, and we'd go and do what we were taught to do. Now, very, very different. It is very different. The larger complex, I say complex, but warehouse, kind of commercial buildings, if it's not persons reported, that risk versus benefit, to save savable life, or what we're throwing people in there for, to essentially what's a derelict property, we will hand back. We will hand back, definitely, for sure. But there's still moments when, if we can save that building, if it's a working establishment, a working commercial building, we will put people in. We will put people in to get in there. But the structures and everything is so different to you guys. We spoke about it briefly before, I believe, that a lot of ours are brick built, sandwich panels. They go on about, but it loses its integrity at certain degrees in temperature, still, all that kind of stuff. But we do get in there. We do get messy.
Well, I mean, just look at Grenfell, for example, like super dangerous fire. And you had, so many people making, incredible rescues from, like we said, 20 plus stories up. And we have the same thing. Like, if you are going to an industrial complex and there's no report of anyone trapped, you don't need to send firefighters in to look for some mythical person that would be in the middle of a chemical warehouse at 2 a.m. when the security guard said there's no one in there. Conversely, like you said, I have been to apartment complexes that are boarded up, and I've watched families pull the boards back, go in, basically pseudo homeless families, and then pull the boards. So there's that as well. But it's same here, risk versus gain. But there's almost like a narcissistic element to some, firefighters' ideas of what we're supposed to do, that there's always a chance that could be there. You need to go into every single fire, and that's bullshit. That's how you get firefighters killed. Risk a lot to save a lot, risk a little to save a little. So the UK and the US are no different. You got the same mindset. If you got a tower block that's covered in petroleum products, that's, just every single flat is being incinerated, and you've still got firefighters, making an interior push and trying to evacuate people and fighting fire. That's what you did. And I think that's what killed me when they started kind of dragging the fire service, the London Fire Brigade, through the coals over that. But, again, you've got some surround and drowned incident. Why would you put someone in? Or, every single window has fire blowing out. Why would you crawl into that? No one in there is going to survive. So
Yeah,
It kills me when we have this arrogance in the American fire service, because we're all doing the same thing around the world, and you learn from each other. But to think that you're better because of fairy tales that you're making up about other departments, every
yeah,
opportunity I get to debunk that, I'm going to. And for example, how many
yeah,
people have fought a literal towering inferno? I never have, but there's many men and
yeah,
women in the London Fire Brigade that did, and it's amazing.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. So when I joined London, I joined just after Grenfell, and the watch I joined they were one of the early pumps onto that incident. So just hear their stories and what they did on that night, to be completely honest, is heroic to the lengths that some of them push. And members of my watch, what they did on that day is just outrageous. The amount of work they did. The stairwell was compromised straight away early on in the incident. These guys were under air, getting up to 18, 20 stories and then bringing people down. The place was, the cladding was going. It was just nothing short of absolute heroes, But then seeing the way that the inquest and inquiry was handled, and pulling the brigade through it, and it was the brigade's issue, again, that put us in a standpoint against the community that it was all our fault. When essentially, there was failings that come off the back of the cultural review. There was things that we needed to do better, and that was understand breaching and compartmentation. Going to that, going as soon as we can. If that breaching compartmentation from upper floors goes further than we expect it to go, then we should be looking at full evacuation. I mean, there's still, sorry to digress, but there's still something like 130 tower blocks in London with the same cladding on it. So it's not a matter of if, it's when it happens again. What the government are doing is just taking too long. It's just taking too long to sort these issues out. But yeah.
Well, and again, learning from these events, look what happened in Hong Kong, basically a version of, they had plastic netting on scaffolding that did exactly the same thing. And I think the death toll was 140, 150 people.
Yeah.
So, it's if we're arrogant and we look at other departments down our nose, then we're not learning anything. If we're humble, I would hope that everyone in the US would go to, look at Grenfell and say, all right, what did you do right? What did you feel like, didn't work this time? And I think the big thing was shelter in place, wasn't it? And in a high rise, usually you would, because it should be able to contain it. But you've got basically fire load strapped to the side of the building. That's a whole different conversation. So, the tactics, if not then, the next time, like you said, have to be completely different. The moment you get a fire on that kind of structure, you've got to try and get everyone out right at the beginning.
Yeah. There were some of the stories you hear, they were going up to the upper floors and knocking on doors, and think these guys have got to live with this. These firefighters have to live with this for the rest of their life, knocking on the door saying, right, the safest place for you is to stay in your flat. It's compartmentalized. It should be it should protect you. But essentially it just, them guys are knocking on doors and walking away, and they've left them families and people in there, and they've got to live with them decisions, and that was down to, we had our failings for sure with how we, and training and stuff, and how we look at high-rise fires, what we implement. I know a big thing with you guys is wind-driven fires in your high-rises. We don't even touch anything like that here. But yeah, lots of things have been implemented off the back of that, how we should do it. We've been looking at with our unions whether or not we can go above the fire floor without going under air. Because essentially, depending on where our bridgehead is set up now, it's usually 2 clear floors below the fire. It's usually that's where you'll go under air and then go. And then we'll have a search sector. But there's been discussions about whether or not we can go above the fire without putting our BA steps on. And all that kind of thing. So there's still discussions going on now. So what we could implement to get to them upper limits, them upper floors that you're not going to get to when you're going under air on the 5th and getting all the way up to the 20th, But yeah, it's interesting, but it's terrifying at the same time.
It is. I think it was Tampa. When I was on the West Coast looking to come back to the East Coast, sadly, it was right when we had the 08 crash. So no one was hiring, but they had special operations, and one of them was helicopter insertion in a high-rise fire. So they would drop firefighters on the roof and they would fight from the top down, which I thought was amazing. But when I think about Grenfell, there's no way in hell you'd be able to do that, because the fire was burning so you're not going to be able to insert. The helicopter wouldn't be able to get close, and if they did, they'd basically be frying the firefighters on the end of the line anyway. So, it is such a complex conversation. And I remember the criticism was the aerials, the ladders. not be able to reach.
Right.
Well, that's just complete misunderstanding of information by the public, because, I mean, most aerials here are 100 feet. So you're lucky if that's even 8 floors.
Yeah. That's the issue, is the perception of what was laid out, that inquiry, and how we dealt with it on the day. But with the high rise, we've got 2 new turntable ladders now, 64 meters. So what's that, 100 and something foot that goes? But that's still not going to get to the top of that high rise.
No.
Yeah, and also the roads aren't, the infrastructure's not there for it. The positioning of that turntable ladder to get the best reach to get to the highest point in that building, you're not going to get it. You're not going to be able to service all of one side of that building with that turntable ladder. So it's crazy.
Absolutely. Well, let's kind of go on your mental health journey, because I know you've got a pretty, powerful story to tell. When you reflect back now, what were some of the events or the beginnings of the downward spiral, and then where was the lowest place that you found yourself?
Oh, wow. So back in 2009, personal life was in a bit of a rough area. Was going through a divorce, not getting to see my children, etc. Trying to maintain and be present at work. We had a particularly horrible incident, and whether I still to this day, I don't know whether that has any drive on what one of the guys did after that incident, but he went home, put a dog choker chain around his neck and tried to hang himself. So I can remember sitting at home that day and getting a call from my station officer saying, "Jace, you're sitting down." I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Such and such is in hospital. He's intubated at the moment. He tried to take his own life." And it was a combination of lots of things. It wasn't that incident. It wasn't that moment. I think it was just where my mental health was with regards to, I was pretty much homeless, sofa surfing. I was living back at home with my parents, which is really difficult to do when you get to a certain age, really hard. And I'd had a huge row with my pops back then. And it was just unattainable for me to live in their house. So I was sofa surfing. I was at a point, I was in a tent. I was staying in a shed. So I was pretty much homeless. And it was really difficult. Then I just, my mental health, I wasn't right to be at work. I wasn't there. I wasn't good enough to be at work. I wasn't in the right frame of mind. I had some time off, went back probably too soon, broke down in tears, broke down crying, and obviously went back to just not existing, just living, just trying to get from day to day. I was still paying a mortgage in the house. Financially, I was really struggling. And alcohol took a big part of my life at that time as well, because I just wanted to sleep through the days, wanted to get away from everything that was happening. I'd do a strip of diazepam a day, to sleep the day off. And I was in a pretty dark place, really, really dark place. And because I'd been off for a period of time, it started to hit certain triggers. So fortunately enough, the brigade were seeing further ahead now. Mental health was definitely looked at differently and was really current around that time, or starting to get its currency. People were really standing up and looking, and the brigade were implementing things. So I got a link officer, a guy called Terry Ridgely. He's no longer with us, but circumstances, events happened that completely, I still to this day, if they hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here to this day. I got to a point, James, where enough was enough. I just didn't think I was good enough to be here. I wasn't a good enough man. I wasn't a good enough husband. I hadn't been a good enough father. And I got a bottle of Oromorph, and I just drank it, and fell asleep. And fortunately enough, it was in a tattoo studio at the time, because I was working at a tattoo studio. I was doing some tattooing and drawing and stuff. And one of the guys had forgot their sketchbook, come back to collect his sketchbook. If he hadn't have come back, he wouldn't have found me. I was shallow breathing, virtually in respiratory arrest, and just slowly passing away, really. So he called the ambulance. I got took into hospital, and then that kind of started to come out then, everything that was going on. They were going, "Well, look, you're depressed, you need to be medicated." And I nearly went down that route. But Terry Ridgely, this man, he was like, right, he'd come to see me every week. He'd come and take my clothes, go and wash my clothes. He'd take me out for some breakfast. He'd give me a little bit of money, because I was on my arse. I had nothing at all. And he's like, "Look, we need to get you back on your feet." He said, "You need to find somewhere to live." A solicitor's letters coming through, getting charged every time a solicit letter comes through, because of the divorce was a little bit messy at that moment in time. And I can remember going back to that tattoo studio, going to lay down where I'd previously just nearly passed away, and sat there in a car, and I just burst into tears. And just as I look up, it's in this little close called Coffridge Close, as just I look up, there was a sign for solicitors, and they specialise in family law. And I walked over, I knocked on the door. This lady called Wendy's answered the door, and I'm just in floods of tears. And she's like, "You all right? You all right?" I said, "Yeah, I see. You give us I just need some free advice, some advice. You do a free consultation." He says, "I do. Sit down, let me get you a cup of tea." True English way, cup of tea, cut the sugars, makes everything better. So I sat there, and she was passing me tissues. I was pretty inconsolable for a little while. And she said, "What do you do, Jason? What do you do for work?" And I said, "I'm a firefighter." And she went, "Did you attend a fire in Parsonham just down the road and save some horses?" I went, "I did. I attended that incident. I was on duty." And she went, "I've been meaning to give thanks to the fire brigade since that incident, but I've just never had the chance to go and thank anybody. So for that reason, I'm going to represent you for free." So she sat me down, went through everything. We started going through everything. And it was just that combination of events, which was just, it's honestly, if it wasn't for that, somebody's definitely looking down on me, for sure. So she started dealing with all of that side of everything for me, letters to the solicitors, and it pretty abruptly stopped because it just so happened, believe it or not, that the solicitor that was sending the letters and coming through was trained by Wendy at her firm.
Crazy.
So yeah, she had a let's just say she had a bone to a bone to pick with her. So she was really, really on it for me. And then off the back of that, I found a little flat, like a little bedsit. Went to Terry Ridgely, my link officer for the Firefighters Charity in London, who are not in London, but the Firefighters Charity in this country, a fantastic organisation. I cannot speak highly enough of them and what they've done for me, and still to this day what they do for me, or have done for me. And he said, "You need to find somewhere to live." So I found this little place, and he's like, "Right, how much is it?" I said, "I can't afford it, Terry. It's like £900. I've got to put 2 months rent down. It's like £900. And he's like, "Don't worry, I'll sort that out." So he literally drove to the bank. Where he got that money from to this day, I don't know, whether it was out of his own pocket or whether it was from the charity, I don't know. So we went back and he went, boom, paid cash. Next thing, I've got a place to live. You know, nothing in it. I was sleeping on the floor, but nothing in it at all. But I said, it was on that airfield, so it was on the drop zone where I skydived. So there's a really cool community of people that I got to sort of started to look after me, and got some really strong friendships. And I was slowly getting back to work. I've gone to work one day. I've come back home expecting to just come to a house, sleeping bag on the floor, and the whole house had been kitted out. My flat, had been kitted out. I had a bed, I had a TV unit, TV, cutlery, condiments, everything. The guys had gone and donated everything or anything that they could find to support me. And that was just like, when you're down and you're bad and you're dark and you're in that place, and still to this day, it's just like, wow, people will do that for other humans, you know? And I can remember just sitting there, and then that kind of all just started to roll on from there. I managed to get back to work, counselling and stuff. And then we started to look into all my triggers, which I'm still trying to figure out now. You know, I still have moments where things can happen, but I'm getting better. I'm learning what I need to do for myself and understanding my triggers and what I need to do. I'm quite, for me personally, with my mental health, I have to have quite a rigid routine. So I'm up early in the morning and I need to do something, where it's 15 minutes of moving, a bit of self-reflection, a bit of meditation. If I knock out of that system, then things start to whittle their way back in a little bit. So I have to maintain that. But essentially, was back in a flat. Then my kids started to see my kids again. I was back at work, and then it just went from there. We got to a point where we talked about medicating me, because the doctors were like, "You're just depressed." I'm like, "Well, hold on a minute. You know, there's a reason I feel like I do. Yeah, I'm depressed. Yeah, it's shit. But hold on a minute, I just got divorced. I'm not seeing my children. I nearly passed away. I haven't had anywhere to live. There's reasonings behind why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling." You know, so slowly, going back to that, one of the hardest things I found mentally was, I was a trained competitor. You know, I fought I fought professionally in mixed martial arts, and I thought I had a strong mindset. I thought I had a strong mental aptitude, and I could hold my own, and I could put things away. But I was completely broken. Anything that I'd learned through that, there was nothing that I could control. And the counsellors were like, well, that's exactly the issue. There's circumstances out of your control. When it comes to competing in mixed martial arts, I knew if I trained my ass off and got as fit as I could, I'd give anyone a scrap. Some worst case scenario, you was going to come out with some lumps and bruises on you, bumps and bruises, But not being able to understand why I couldn't control what was going on in my head was really difficult. So we looked at some medication and stuff, and I was like, no, I don't need it. And then, slowly got back to work, got back into the rhythm of things. I've had a few blips along the way since then, but essentially, I can look back now and looking onto that of 2009 and really see how poorly I was, and how far I've come. How far I've come from then, and how well I understand myself and my own triggers and stuff now. So, it's circumstances of offence. I think had triggered a butterfly effect, if you like, which kept me here and give me a purpose. My nan always said, "I'm here for a reason," and you're here to help. And that was that really. So I learned a tremendous amount of vulnerability of what I've been through, and I can share that with people that I work with. But it was a tremendously difficult time, and I just was lucky enough to come out the other side of it through the right people and the right things happen at the right moment,
I want to get to the reason that you're still here, but just going back to when you were struggling immensely, when we see the mental health posters and the conversations, sadly, usually it's, Jason saw all these horrible things, some of these calls that you talked about, and that's why he's struggling, and we're missing, a lot of the conversations about sleep deprivation, about, moral injury, organizational stress, et cetera, et cetera. But on the actual conversation of when people get to that point of suicide, the way that we heard people talking when we were young was suicide is selfish, it's cowardly, how could you think of your kids? But then you listen to people, and in my case, hundreds of people that have been there, some of whom actually went through their attempt and they survived. A lot of people were there, and then they had that God moment, just like you did with the tattoo artist. But with this perfect storm of all things, everything from the job, then, relationship issues, et cetera, that perfect storm, it's never one thing, it's everything. There seems to be a miswiring of the brain where the people actually believe that they are the reason for the people that they love's pain. And if they just remove themselves, everyone will be happier. Did you have that little voice in your ear?
Yeah, I did. And do you know what? I'll be completely honest and vulnerable here. I still get it. I still get it today when I've had them moments, but that's something I'm not going to act on. That was, when I look back to that moment, it was a fuck you, I've had enough kind of moment. It was, and I've got the tools and the conscious ability now to recognize before I get anywhere near that again. But I certainly had that moment. Yeah, I certainly did, buddy.
Well, I think this is why it's so important, because that's a huge red flag. If we are hearing a voice, if we're starting to believe that we are the issue, we're a burden to the people that we love, when a clear mind obviously knows that when we take our own lives, we add more pain to our family, it reframes that miswiring of the brain. So at that moment, in theory, it makes that act courageous and selfless. If you truly believe that if I just go, everything will be better, then that's a sacrifice. But obviously it's a conversation from a distorted mind at that point. So be able to pull people back away from that, get them to kind of start healing, as you said, surrounding them with community and all this love that you were exposed to, it quietens that mind again, and people are able to see, well, wait a second, no, my kids do love me, my parents do love me, et cetera, but it's such a dangerous voice that's compounded by our profession, because you've already got these struggles, and then day in, day out, you're adding more trauma, you're adding more sleep deprivation, so it's chipping away at this even more. So hearing this over and over and over again, this feeling of being a burden, I think it needs to be front and center in the mental health conversation. So when you start hearing that voice, that's when you need to start telling people. That's when you need to lean into the people you love, because that's the beginning of that really, crisis downward spiral by that point.
Yeah, for sure. But I felt like I had nobody to approach, nobody to talk to. I mean, we're talking 2009. You get to now, how prevalent, how it's people applauded for their vulnerability, for speaking about their mental health, which is fantastic. I think that's definitely it's incredible. But I felt like I had nowhere to turn. The Firefighters Charity helped me in one aspect of support, but I didn't realise what we had there was the mental health counselling aspect of it, where you can get a certain amount of trauma sessions, counselling and all this kind of stuff now. They've got Harkham House where you can go and have reset breaks with them. So you can go and spend 7 days and they do a bit of movement, you do meditation, you have group sessions. There's so many things in place. And it is current. And it is a brilliant thing that we have. I'm hoping now that people have the ability to when they feel vulnerable, when they feel down, that they have that opportunity to speak to people. And I think going back to the watch culture, especially on a fire station, when you've got that click and you've been together for a long time, you can read people. When you're self-aware, you can see when people might not be quite right, and you can just check in on them. But you create an environment where people feel safe and willing to open up when they are feeling it, when they're not feeling right. I mean, now, especially with the brigade as such, we have a fatal incident, we get a POS team, they phone us up straight after the incident, we have a critical debrief, then they'll come down and you're offered counselling straight away. I mean, that wasn't the case back in 2009, but it was a combination of lots of things, not just the incidents. They were the icing on the cake, if you like, but it was everything else that led up to that as well.
Well, also your story highlights how important community is. And if you look even recently, I think there's been studies that have shown that even just longevity in general, like, the ability to stave off disease, is less about even diet and exercise and more about relationships. And so when we were talking, for example, at the beginning, the high bar that's set at the front door of the fire service creates this cohesive team, these relationships that, will be there through your whole career. Those are the people that will not only see if you're struggling, but as in your case, all those members of the tribe that came together surrounded you and gave you the foundation to then pick you up. So when we see this kind of divisive nastiness that's being pumped at the moment, it's no wonder that we have more of a mental health crisis. The way that we counter that, whether it's in our profession or even nationally or internationally, is that we refine the very community that, as the phrase says, it takes a village. This is, if you look far enough back in time in human history, we existed in these small groups that were there for each other, whatever we were going through.
Yeah, it was shared trauma, wasn't it? But I mean, and that's what we try to do now. There's something which food, exercise, all of these things have a huge part to play now in my life and my mental well-being, for sure. Getting up in the morning, getting training. But back then, when that disappeared and gone away, you didn't realise how much of an impact that exercise had. And then being at station, being around the people that I cared about. But when you're not there, you soon become a memory rather than being pertinent or present in people's life. People do forget about you. And I was lucky enough to have the skydiving community, them guys, which all clubbed together and did what they did for me at that time, for sure.
So talk to me, we're just switching a little bit now, about Unified Against Violence.
Yes. Okay. So actually 2 years ago today, 16th of December, was when we first set the charity up, myself and Miriam Martinez. We basically, being in the position that we're in within London, like most fire brigades, we're still in a very privileged position. We knock on a front door, 99.9% of members of the community can open their front door and let us in. London itself, currently at the moment, James, I think from March up to March last year, so 2025, London itself had over 16,300 sharp implement attacks. So that works out around about 43 a day. So that would be somebody being held up at knife point, they're not all ending in, physical stabbings, but there's sharp implements at play, and that's horrendous. And then you boil that down to our borough, and currently at the moment within the borough that I work in, we've got on average around about 4 stabbings a day or 4 attacks a day, 2 shootings a week. It's incredible. And we're turning up to more and more of these incidents, because the LAS, the London Ambulance Service, are so stretched. We're getting called to incidents where it might be a road traffic collision, for example. We get there and it's a gang's run someone off their bike. Or we get there and it's been essentially a drive-by shooting with a small caliber rifle, and you can't see the entry wounds, let alone and no exit wounds. So it's really hard to figure out what's going on. So it's really kind of like understanding what we could do, what we can implement, maybe to support the community, especially the borough that I was in at the time with Brent. And I remember driving around, we come past in a truck, we come past the courts, and there was like a defib box on the wall, and it had bleed kit written on it. So I'm like, what's that? So I started doing some investigation. Basically, it's a catastrophic bleed kit, tourniquet, blast bandages, Olay dressings and things like that were within this box. So I went back to station, started thinking about it, spoke to my borough commander at the time, was a fantastic man called Alan Allmark, and took the idea to him and said, look, I want to put bleed kits and defibs on the front of our fire stations for public access, and then we'll upload them to this Good Samaritan app. And then what will happen is if you dial 999 and you need a defib, or if you need a bleed kit, it will tell you where the closest is. Whether or not you'll get there in time, that catastrophic bleeds are different, but they're there. And if somebody's on duty, we will support you. That truck will come out and help. All right. So all of the staff, we then put a training package together for the firefighters within Brent to start upskill their training to deal with catastrophic bleeds. And then essentially that organically grew into a registered charity, which it is now, a community interest charity. So it's a non-profit organisation. And what we try to do is we try to go into the worst affected boroughs in and around London. And we basically look at all of the local charities and foundations within that borough, which is pertinent to that borough, and try to do, and we put together an event, essentially, get everybody around. So like Freshers Week at university or college, lots of different things that are available to you. So we're showing what's available for people which might have loved ones that are currently serving in prison but don't have that link officer or the ability to understand the system or how to get into prison to see their loved ones. We started working with a fantastic charity called Jigsaw, which do conflict resolution. Unbelievable guys. They do the mentoring and conflict resolution with these young people. He also goes out and picks these young people up, which are deemed as high risk. And he'll go out anytime, day or night, Chris, and he'll go and take these kids out of these dens and bring them to a safe haven. And incredible work. So, we organically started to get together, and I started to meet some really interesting people. So I think we spoke briefly, met a guy called Farron Paul. So Faz Amnesty runs his Instagram stuff. And this guy was a former gang member, I think, and he got, I might be wrong, but I'm sure he got stabbed on 2 separate occasions up to 9 times. So had to learn to walk again, all of that kind of stuff. And he set up his charity, Faz Amnesty. So what they do, Farron Paul, his name is, what he does is he goes out and he collects knives from these gang members and stuff. But he has a system where you can contact him through Instagram. So once he has that trail of conversation, if that young person gets caught with a knife coming to meet him, he can show that he's going to he's putting his knife into an amnesty bin. And I could be wrong with the numbers, but there was something like 12,000 knives which he'd confiscated. I mean, samurai swords, zombie knives, all sorts of stuff. And then he'd obviously put them back into the Met Police, and then he'd hand them into the police stations within them boroughs. And then we met a guy called Christian Dippo, who runs the Spartan Warrior Project. They do community workshops. They support young people by movement. They do all this calisthenic stuff, breakdancing, and tons of stuff for the community. But what was really unique with them at the time was they were taking the knives which had been handed in and confiscated and handed into the Met Police. They were taking them, smelting them down. And then IMO, the guys were blacksmiths, would mount them down, and they were making outdoor gym equipment with them. So they were making outdoor gym areas. I think they got one in Brixton, one in Croydon. And then these guys are going out off their own back, completely non-profit, and putting on calisthenic training sessions from kids all the way up to, you know, adults. And some of the stuff they're doing is insane. So organically met some really cool people. So yeah, the charity's been officially up and running now as a registered charity for about a year. And yeah, it's just, we're in a horrible position where we're having to be reactive because of what's happened for so long. How we stop, how we support these young people is essentially mentoring, you know. These kids are groomed and targeted at a very young age. They're looked at by their gangs from outside. They're usually from single parent families where mum might be working 2 jobs. She'll be coming home late, so they'll be on their own until sort of, you know, 7:30 at night, 8 o'clock at night, whatever it may be. And they give them that family feeling that they've you know, that they've not had a place of, you know, a place that they feel like they're part of a family. And that starts quite simply by money, buying them things. You know, these are the things that they can recognise, family members, when they're behaving different, coming home in new clothes and stuff. And that's how they do it. They just pull them in. And I've heard some horrific stories, you know, of young people, because they target that age group. They know that if they get caught with anything on them by the police can't do anything because they're so young. Yeah, you know, they could get tagged, but they can't go into the prison or anything like that. They can go into youth establishments and they can get tagged, but there's nothing that they can really do. So I think a large problem why this has been happening is the loss of youth centres, the ability for these young people to go out and do stuff. And I'm a great advocate for sport. I've seen what it's done for so many people myself and other young people with boxing, MMA, you know, having that, being present, having to be there, having to communicate, all these kind of things, you know. So that mentorship thing is essentially huge, and we've got to pull that back or do something to be able to support these young people. But the issues that we have with that is a lot of these kids can't leave the area that they live in, the postcode area that they live in. They can't be expected to go to a gym if it's within a certain area or a postcode because they can't cross that side of the road. And then on top of that, there's a financial obligation for them to pay to do this training. So some of these kids can't even afford it. So it's a really, really horrible environment to be growing up in for a lot of these young people in London, which is supposed to be one of the most affluent cities. But yet there's really signs of, you know, deprived of money, food. We've got food banks and stuff now. You can see people queuing up down the road by the fire station, queuing up for food banks. And this is like, what is going on with this world? You know, what is going on? But yeah, that was essentially it. So we grew this project, we grew this charity. We've met some fantastic people along the way. And we just try to get out in the community just to show people what they can do, what people can do with a bleed kit, what people can do without it. You know, there's... unfortunately, a lot of these young people which get attacked, the first responders are usually either their friends or a member of the public which come past it. And it's given, hopefully, people a bit of power, a bit of confidence to interject in regards to first aid, because a lot of these kids are bleeding out. You know, they're not dying from the direct stab wound. It's because they're getting a lack of treatment within them critical moments of that attack and being able to, you know, stop that blood flow, that catastrophic bleed. So we've found a wonderful charity again called Your Stance. These guys are all from the Royal Free Trauma Units. They go out delivering free training within the community. They got all the kit where they can do the arterial bleeds, how to stop it, how to use things that they will have on them rather than a bleed kit, shoelaces, you know, shirts and stuff. But yeah, it's been really powerful, and it's been really, really interesting period over the last 2 years, and the kind of the friendships that we've made and the people that we've met.
I don't remember this being a problem when I was still back home. So I'm assuming in the last, I mean, it seems like 10, 15 years, this has really exploded as far as the knife crime. When you're hearing conversations about this, what are the contributing factors that are amplifying this violence amongst so many young people in the UK?
Financially, financially it's a huge part to play. And the fact that these kids are groomed to the point that they feel like they're in a family environment, but the financial drive for kids. So I've had some really sticky conversations with gang members, just wanting to find out, wanting to talk. Like it's just sat there, they're all hooded up, bellied up, sat and chatting away. And I'm like, look, what's going on? Why are you doing what you're doing? Why aren't you? They're like, what? This is my family. I'll do anything for them, And there's three words that always resonate. And it's like, will you let them get away with that? You can't let them get away with that. But you sat there talking away. The guy's phone's going, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. His phone's going off, constantly going off. I'm like, well, go out and get a job. And they're like, why would I go and get a job? I can earn £500 in 20 minutes on my phone. I'd have to go to work 7 days a week to earn that kind of money. And they're just dripping in clothes. They're driving around in flash cars. And these are, they share that car between a group of them. So they all pay for it financially every month. But I think the bottom line falls with mentorship, keeping people in school, in clubs where they've got good people around them. We talk about that community tribe, but financially, it's really, really tough for some of these young people in the environment they're in to keep away from that, that option.
Behind that first layer, is it basically the illicit drug trade that's creating all this money?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, weed, cocaine, crack, that kind of things. That's how they run it around. They're very, very clever in how they do that. We've heard stories of certain buses. They take the panels off of certain buses and they can put firearms in the panel of that bus, or they put the drugs in the bus that will travel on a certain route and they pick it all up. But pretty much it's drug related and drug driven. Yeah.
The older I get, the more I'm educated by all these amazing guests, the more fundamental a lot of answers to our problems become. And if you look at the damage that drug prohibition has done, making addiction illegal, it has empowered the gangs. It has created the Crips and the Bloods and the drill culture in the UK and the cartels in Mexico. And the obvious answer, and you look at Portugal as a perfect example, is if you take addiction, you take addicts and you put them in the hands of the medical community and you fully fund that. So you give them addiction counseling, mental health counseling, housing, job creation, and you get people from being an addict and using government support to being a healthy tax-paying member of society. You cut the head off the snake, because it's supply and demand at its most fundamental level. And, prostitution and some of these other things are all tied into that as well. If you haven't got strung out young boys and girls, you're not going to have, anywhere near as many people willing to sell their body for sex either. So this is what kills me, is that there are so many proactive solutions, but they take courage from real leadership that really would turn this around. And if you had young people growing up, but selling drugs simply just wasn't an option because there's no demand, because all the addicts are in the hands of the medical community, either healing or getting, sustaining through medically distributed ability to get their drugs, like methadone, for example. Then you've literally cut the legs off the underworld. And we saw that with alcohol prohibition, with Al Capone, with alcohol in the beginning of the 1900s in the US. It was an absolute disaster. When they legalized the alcohol again, don't get me wrong, alcohol is not a great drug. We all know that. But you didn't see people bootlegging anymore. You didn't see gangs murdering each other over Jack Daniels or Bell's Scotch. You know what I mean? So I think this is a massive conversation. If we took the power away from the illicit drug trade, it would have such an immense impact for the US, for the UK, and other places that still believe in the fucking massive failure that is the air quotes war on drugs.
Yeah, it's terrible. And I couldn't have said it any better, to be perfectly honest with you. With addiction and stuff like that, well, it's usually comes with a mental health problem. Treat the problem, not the addiction. The problem is probably their childhood trauma, things that they've gone through in their life to put them in the position that they're in. A lot of these people, don't get me wrong, there's people that are going out doing these drugs and are getting supplied them. But you are right. Start treating the people rather than them having that horrible kind of like looked at as an addict, that they're dirty, that they're horrible people. They're not. I've not met one addict through my life that's a nasty person or a horrible person. They're there because of the conflict that they've had through their young life, you know. But that's essentially, that's what we need to do. I mean, we've been talking about decriminalising weed for years in the UK, and it keeps getting knocked back. And the biggest thing with that is who's one of the largest medical suppliers of medical grade marijuana in the world? The UK.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but you can't get medical grade marijuana for people to treat people in this country. It's starting to loosen up now, but we are one of the biggest suppliers.
That's crazy.
It's bonkers, right?
Yeah,
it's bonkers. You know, it beggars belief. It really is.
Yeah,
it really is. But
yeah, it's just, I mean, there's so many, you know, reasons why you should, you know what I mean? And you know, people ask for studies in the fire service, you know, with the sleep research, for example. Oh, can you show us studies? And there's a certain point where it's just common sense. Like, you know, for the hours that they work in this country, they're like, okay, you got, without any overtime at all, 56-hour week and a 42-hour week. Do you need a study to show you that a 42-hour week is going to be healthier? No, you don't. Same in reverse. Do we need any more studies to show that that drug prohibition does not work? We've got an 80-year longitudinal study that has just got worse and worse. Homelessness, prostitution, addiction, you know, overdoses. I mean, you know, the gang killings, all of these, you know, and the drill culture, that all stems from, you know, empowering the underworld through the illicit drug trade. And then you have the audacity of people saying, well, you know, the problem is these broken homes. Well, why do you think these homes are fucking broken? Have a look into the backstory of their homes. There's probably addiction, alcoholism. So if again, back to the dominoes, if we stop this generational trauma, then the next generation isn't going to be exposed to these broken homes anymore. If we heal this current generation, they'll hopefully be the loving mothers and fathers that create this community. You'll have mentors in the community putting on boxing tournaments and football games and, you know, CrossFit and all that stuff. And now you've got people working together, and the mentors aren't the dope dealers anymore. The mentors are the cops and the firefighters and the teachers and the PE teachers. And now all of a sudden these kids are going back down a good path again. But it's so blatantly obvious. But like you said, when it comes to actually getting the people that we pay in the positions to actually make the change, there's nothing but moral cowardice, and it nauseates me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can only speak for what's happening in London, but it's happening in cities all around the UK. But essentially, the issue in London, this has been going on since the late 90s, the postcode wars, you know, and nothing was done then. These communities weren't supported then. They started taking away all the youth clubs and things like that. And then you put a mayor in place, Sadiq Khan, who we've taken a blueprint of what they did in Glasgow in Scotland to help with the youth violence and knife crime, if you like, the violence reduction unit. So that blueprint from Glasgow has come down to London, and we're trying to implement that in London to reduce drug use, addiction, all these kind of things. But what grips my shit is you've got essentially a government and a mayor that is able to eradicate a dog breed within months of 3 or 4 attacks, when essentially there's no such thing as a bad dog, it's a bad owner. And we lose a breed of dog within a period of time. The financial implications for that, instead of educating people, taking these dogs or doing something, and there's so many options available, either than eradicating a breed of animal. That money, that finances, where is that? You know, why is that not getting pushed back into our communities? Why is that not getting rebuilding youth homes and stuff like that? It's just, it makes me angry. It does really grip my shit, mate. It really does.
Well, using the dogs as an example, we had German Shepherds my whole life. I was just talking to Ash, who I interviewed this morning. SAS, tier 1 operator, I guess. But that was one of his lifelines, was his dog. And we had German Shepherds, arguably people could say a dangerous breed, my whole life as a kid all the way through. So there's one sitting outside my door right now. The only time I've ever seen an issue is someone, my dad was a veterinary surgeon. Someone gave him, I think Pudding was like a year old. So they'd had this dog for a while. They didn't want it anymore. They gave it to my dad, and I go up to the fields one day, and there's like 4 dead sheep lying in there, and the German Shepherd had killed them all. The only difference between all the different dogs that we had and that one was obviously the way that they were treated in their early life. It's no different with people. We all start off, you know, if you and me and a bunch of murderers and a bunch of, you know, burglars and drug addicts and homeless people were all 2 years old in a kindergarten, we would all be laughing and playing with crayons and kicking the ball to each other. That's how we all start. It's what happens to us. And then the mentors, good or bad, that are surrounded, you know, that are put in front of us, that determine whether James and Jason become firefighters or James and Jason end up in prison. It's that simple.
Yes.
So, you know, the dog is a great analogy of what needs to happen in the UK. You don't eradicate all white people because white people steal. You figure out what happened to the white people that made them steal. It's the same exact concept.
Yeah, it's insane. And now, you know, we have these conversations. I do a lot, obviously still within the borough, and our contextual safeguarding meetings. I sit in with them, with the Met Police, and their relationship is completely fractured with the community. That's going to take years and years and years for them to be able to pull that back. Their attrition rate with recruitment. I mean, they've got an open recruitment policy. It runs all year round. And I think the last time I spoke to a Met Police officer, they said within a period of about 4 or 5 months, they'd had 4 applicants.
In the
so
Metropolitan Police, as in the entire city of London?
Yes.
4, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's because they are under the microscope constantly. They can't do their jobs properly. They've got body cams. They're expected to give you a report on everything they do. And the communities are in such a state of array that the smallest thing that they can say will be investigated. So they can't, you know, I remember growing up, I was terrified of the police. I can remember stepping out in the road once and a police car come around the corner, didn't put his indicator on. I went, yeah, you could put your indicator on, mate. Coppers got out of the car, walked round, slapped me around the head. Yeah, I'm like, oh, why do that again? You know, but there's no... It's difficult, isn't it? It's really difficult, but the police are in a real bad state. So the LAS really, we really need funding and really need support. How they do that, God only knows. It's about bringing that relationship back with the community. It's going to take them time, a lot of time.
Well, this is circling all the way back to the beginning of our conversation with where that bar is set and that attracting the right people. Because I just was on the phone to someone who's out of our profession, but she's in HR and she's married to a firefighter turned cop here in the US. And she was, you know, saying, they said one of the problems is, you know, the kids today don't want to work. And I'm like, well, you know, let me correct you on that. The problem is that most young people today value their physical health, their mental health, their relationships. And so when they look at an organization that constantly throws them under the bus, or an organization that doesn't address, in my country, the horrendous lack of recruitment and therefore forced overtime, therefore people are never home, therefore there's divorces and fractured relationships with children, this young generation is going, well, I'd love to be a cop or a firefighter, but that working environment doesn't look good and that organization clearly doesn't seem to support their people. I'm going to go be a welder. I'm going to go into carpentry. I still want to, you know, work with my hands. I still want to, you know, do all the things that a firefighter or a cop would do. I would love to serve, but that's not the organization. So it's not about, you know, looking for different types of candidates. It's like, well, then looking in the mirror and go, well, what are we doing wrong? And having a high bar in, you know, London police, having, you know, a fitness standard, having then the support, the training, the physical training, the defensive tactics, you know, the ability maybe for different ways to address the increasing level of violence and weapons even in the UK. I mean, all these areas. I've got a friend who's was a former armed police in London. And again, every time something happened, it was always pictured as their fault until they could prove otherwise, you know, guilty until proven innocent. So the way that you attract young people back into our professions is the first thing you got to show that you're actually going to support them. But if you're just kowtailing to every single politician that sticks their neck out, and then, you know, now you've got 4 applicants, what is going to happen in the city of London? It's just going to empower, you know, the bad people of the city. And now the residents are going to be less safe than they ever were before.
Yeah, it's mad. I mean, we get a lot of, obviously, with the incidents that we turn up to, the police arriving and the abuse that they get. You know, I'm like, what are you doing? How do you think that's appropriate? So whether where has that come from? You know, where is that disdain or that belief that they're there to do you harm constantly? I mean, it's been bred over time. I understand, you know, the backstory to some of it, but you don't know that individual. They're there to try and help and support your community and what's going on, and try and catch a bad guy essentially, or a bad person, and take them off the street. And you're doing what you're doing to them. You know, it's mad. It's mad. They have a tremendously difficult job. I doff my hat to the guys in the Met Police at the moment and what they've got to go through. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
But I think it's conversations like this from the people on the ground level, you know, that are doing the job, that are seeing, you know, like now on the other side of a profession, seeing what's happening on a more macro level, you know, nationally and internationally. And there's these common reoccurring themes that do have solutions, but it takes courage in positions of leadership. With that being said, because we've been chatting for 2 hours now, I want to be mindful of your time. I want to throw some quick closing questions at you, if that's okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, crack on.
The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
I'm not a big reader of books. I have to, for me, it's got to be something which is it's realistic, something that's happened, or a biography, something like that. I did read a book fairly recently by Dr. Matthew Walker. Have you heard of
Why
that
We
guy?
Sleep?
Why We Sleep?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Listen to him on some podcasts. Incredible. I've thoroughly enjoyed that. And Captain Scott is something I read quite recently. With it's Sir Ranulph Fiennes' kind of take on their document, his Captain Scott's documentation on how they live. So him being an explorer, him being in them positions of, you know, detriment and in tough times, and him applying his knowledge and his decision making to what he's found within in their reports and books. And that's a pretty cool book. So yeah, that's probably the only two books recently of note that I've read.
Brilliant. What about TV, documentary, or films?
Oh wow, James! Oh my God. We have this discussion around the mess table, and this is a tremendously difficult question to ask because there's just too much out there. Documentary-wise, The Last Dance about Michael Jordan.
Yeah,
fantastic documentary. His ability to compete, his leadership style. It was like, if you're part of this team, you're coming along with me. And that discussion of who's the GOAT, whether it's LeBron James or whether it's Michael Jordan. It's like Michael Jordan's got 6 rings with the same team. You know, he pulled them through, some of these players. And then what's sad as well is the relationships that they have now. You know, Scottie Pippen and his relationship with Michael Jordan. That's quite sad to see. But ultimate competitor, you know, the drive and dedication, that the obsessiveness that you know that you have to be good at anything like on that level, you've got to be obsessed with it. And yes, that's a tremendous documentary. Movies, Saving Private Ryan, Shawshank Redemption, you know, all of them kind of stuff. I still watch them to this day. So yeah, that'll be the movies.
Great films. It's funny, I was struck by the same thing. On paper, Michael Jordan obviously has a lot of wealth, a lot of statistics showing success in his basketball team. But the same way I talk a lot about what we do to youth athletes in America, meaning they go and win high schools or colleges, you know, games, championships, but then they get hurt. And it's detrimental ultimately to their longevity and their mental health. Yeah. It's the same with that. Like, what ultimately, when you take a step back, what was more important, winning those basketball games and being rich, or all of the broken or fractured relationships that you never really had because the points were more important than the person? And it's an interesting thing to ponder.
Yeah. It definitely is. When you watch that documentary and you see where the times he spent on his own in solitude, in hotels and thousands of people outside. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it, to be that focused and to be that driven. Wow. And the film, the Nike film as well, his mum, how powerful she was in the discussions with Nike and Adidas to get that Nike deal over the line is pretty spectacular too. So yeah, incredible stories.
I wonder if it was ever enough. We talked about, always wanting to be told I love you, or I'm proud of you by a parent or a mentor. So many of us in high performing, roles, whether it's in uniform, whether it's in sports, there's a lot of times there's that element of, not feeling like you were enough, whether it's chasing the love of a parent, whether it's, low self-esteem. I wonder if he ever felt like it was enough. I bet you the answer is no.
Yeah, do you know what that puts me back to? A clip I watched not so long ago, and it's a journalist asking Mike Tyson, if Gus D'Amonto was here today, what would you say to him? And he stops and he pauses, and it gives you goosebumps. And because he never got to see him be the world champ, did he? And he said, did I do good? Did I do good? Did I do right? And just, that man, that is like, just in stature, just in aura, to see that and see him break down. And it simply is that validation from that human being that pulled him away from where he was going and gave him what he did. Incredibly powerful, really powerful.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of great people, is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
So I listened to a podcast not so long ago with a tier 1 operator, Christian Craighead. You heard his story? If you could get hold of that guy.
Yeah, I haven't got a connection with him. He was the one that was in Nairobi when he went into that shopping mall.
That's it, yeah. Obi-Wan Nairobi. But he, incredible guy. But I think if you want a real in-depth look in what's going on in London with relation to youth violence and youth crime and stuff, I would definitely put forward Christian Dippo from the Spartan Project. He's the work that he's doing. He's got a really good. He's got a pretty cool story too. And then obviously Farron Paul and his Faz Amnesty. I mean, they could give you a really good in-depth, their kind of point of view on what's going on, and a really detailed picture of youth violence and stuff, what's going on in London at the moment. Farron Paul, he gets all up the country, going up to West Mids and everything to collect knives and stuff. So, I mean, got really powerful what they're doing in the community in and around London for sure.
Brilliant. If you're able to help me with any of those connections, I'd love to get them on.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Fantastic. All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure where everyone knows where to find you and your nonprofit, what do you do to decompress?
Like most people here, unfortunately for me, it's still that old traditional hoodie on, headphones on, heavy bag, no time limit, just hit it away, bap, up and down. I'm 48 this coming year, and I still try to keep them fast twitch my fibers going. It's getting harder, but I'm still swinging in there, keeping it with the youngsters. So the gym for me. I actually, after hearing you quite recently, went to the gym and went, I'm going to do the 3-4-3, and just set myself up in the gym. Boy, you're a fit man, James. I blasted that. I couldn't walk for about 3 days afterwards.
Oh, was that the Chab 1000, the steps?
No, the 3-4-3. So the 100 deadlifts, the hundreds. Is it?
Oh, yeah. You're talking about the Murph. You mean? Was it the Murph?
Yeah, the Murph. Yeah. The 100 deadlifts, 100. Wow.
Yeah.
And then the burpees, man. Who thought that up?
Yeah. No. So that was you were talking about an old. Was it one of the old workouts that we put? I can't remember now because there's so many different versions of it. But yeah, I love those ones because it's it's not about how fast you did it. It's just about doing it. So whether it's Murph, whether it's Chab 1000, whether it's some of these other ones. But yeah, in my mind I can see a post in my head of the 3-4-3 that we did a few years ago, and it was exactly what you're talking about. So yeah, those are humbling to say the least.
Yeah, and sometimes we need that. I have them workouts where I can go in the gym, and that's certainly one of them now, where I don't have to think about what I'm doing, because sometimes it can be an environment that can be quite overstimulating. But I've got 5 or 6 workouts I can go in, takes 25, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it is, blast it out. My body's up, boom, and I could go and sit in the sauna, get home, have an afternoon kip, and then that's it. We're golden.
Beautiful. Well, for people listening, then, where can they find the Unified Against Violence, and then where else can they reach out to you on social media or online?
Brilliant. Okay, so Unified Violence is on Instagram. It's unified_against_violence. That's pretty straightforward. And then myself, I'm not mad on. I am on Instagram. JCube0067. So JAYKUBE0067 used to be my old brigade number. So yeah, I post on there. But if anyone wants to chat, I reach out. I mean, I'm over in Florida in May with my daughter for cheer. So I was going to see if I can stick my head in a fire station somewhere, which you might be able to hook me up with for that.
Definitely.
And see some bits and pieces. Yeah, that'd be great. But yeah, that's essentially it. And I'm on Facebook as J Kubiak, Kubiak. So yeah, that's it. But yeah, if anyone reaches out, if there's anything I can help with or anything of interest, then I'm all in, buddy. If I can support somebody or help somebody, I'm there.
Well, I appreciate it, mate. It's been such an amazing conversation. Again, we've gone all over the place, which I like these long form chats that we do now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, James. Thank you.